Hi everyone, I'm going to be talking about development today, particularly the first half, so from conception to through childhood. Then the second half will be from adolescence to adulthood. And then obviously this is just a small snapshot. There's a whole class on lifespan development. So this is just a tiny piece. To begin, these are some research methods that developmental psychologists might use. So cross-sectional research is where you are comparing people at different ages, but at the same point in time. So if I wanted to know, I think older people are more depressed than younger people, then what I could do if I was doing a cross-sectional study is take Beck's depression inventory and survey 20 and 30-year-olds, and then 60 and 70-year-olds. And then I could see if there was a correlation. The problem with this is that obviously it's the same point in time, right? But they've had really different experiences, and it's not necessarily an easy comparison because there could be a lot of confounding factors. But it's something that I can get done relatively quickly in research time compared to a longitudinal study, which is where you use the same sample. So you're using the same participants at different points in time. So maybe I want to look at depression over a lifetime. So I have a sample and I measure them when they're 20, then I measure them again when they're 30 and then 40. So obviously you can see how that takes a lot more time and sort of effort. You have to have, a good research lab or university backing you with grants to conduct that kind of study, because there won't be publishable results for a really long time. So you're sort of waiting for the payoff. But it's useful in that it's the same participants. So you're really getting a snapshot at somebody's life and how they change. And then a sequential research is kind of a combination of both. So I might want to look at depression, and I could do both. So I want to see, I'm going to measure some people today, and then I'll measure them again in 6 months. And then I'm also going to measure people from different age groups right now, and then kind of put all of that together and see what I have. So it doesn't take as long as longitudinal research, but it's a little bit more effective than cross-sectional research because there's a longitudinal piece to it. Usually those check-ins are quicker than actual longitudinal research though. So I might check in after 1 year versus like waiting 5 years or something like that. Okay, so prenatal development, basics of genetics. We all have 23 pairs of chromosomes. One comes from our mom, one comes from our dad. Our chromosomes are filled with thousands of genes that make us up. A zygote is when the sperm and the egg form a union, and after the sperm has made it through the cervix and then meets up with the egg, and then they together, the zygote moves through the fallopian tube and then tries to attach to the uterine wall. And about 10% of zygotes are able to sort of hang on and actually develop into an embryo. The first 2 weeks when the zygote is on the uterine wall and its cells begin replicating, it's called the germinal period. And so then the next period after the first 2 weeks, then it moves into being an embryo. This is where it starts developing a heart, a brain, other organs. That's up to 8 weeks. So from 2 weeks to 8 weeks is the embryo. At the end of 8 weeks, it's about 1 inch big. And then after 8 weeks until birth, it's called a fetus. Mothers begin to feel the fetus moving at the quickening, which happens about 16 to 18 weeks. So that's the first time the mom can feel the fetus moving around inside of her. And then age of viability is just like what it sounds. It's when the fetus is viable to live independently outside of the mother, usually about 22 weeks, just depends on sort of the medical care that's available. One of the bigger problems is that lungs are sort of one of the last things that fully develop. So usually breathing is the biggest issue. Prenatal environmental influences There are what they call critical periods where if something happens to the mom or the child at particular times, it could cause a malformation, cognitive issues, a disability of some sort. And it can happen with different things at different points. I guess just overall, the most sensitive period for just general malformations of the fetus is like the 2 to 8 week mark. So when they're an embryo and all of that sort of beginning development of the fetus is happening is a critical period. Other things are teratogens, so environmental things that could produce a birth defect. A mom getting enough nutrition, making sure she's getting her vitamins, really important. Of course, drugs, alcohol, nicotine use, all of those could affect the development of a fetus. A mother becoming ill, also a risk. There's been a few studies that have a correlation between moms who got the flu while they were pregnant and their child developing schizophrenia later in life. So that's something interesting. They have no idea why. They just know that there's a correlation between those things right now. So the newborn, it's here, it comes out. The things that help it survive are reflexes. So these are automatic, involuntary responses to stimuli. So you touch its cheek and it turns its head. It knows how to suck, so it can breastfeed. It has a gag reflex, so it doesn't choke, things like that. Without those automatic reflexes, it would be difficult for newborns to survive. And then sensory development, they can follow objects within their field of vision. They can discriminate between facial expressions, and they recognize their mom's voice at 3 days old. So thinking about sort of childhood, toddlers, things like that, there was a researcher who wanted to look at attachment. So how do emotional bonds work? His name was Harry Harlow, and what he did was he took baby monkeys away from their moms, sad, and then he would put them in a cage with 2 wire monkeys, I guess monkey should have been in quotes, and one was just the wire and it would have a bottle attached and that's where the monkey could get food. And then the second one was also wire, but it was covered in cloth, so it'd be soft and warm for the baby monkey. And what he found was that the baby would stay with the cloth monkey almost all day and only move over to the wire one to eat real quick, and then he would move right back. So it was definitely showed how important the skin-to-skin contact, a touch, and sort of cuddling forms that attachment bond. In a different study, there was it's called the Ainsworth strain situation. This is where a mom and a baby would walk into a room. Mom would sit down, a stranger would come in, the mom would leave, and they'd kind of go back and forth a few times to see how the babies reacted. And from doing that, they were able to identify some attachment patterns. So the secure attachment would be where they're thinking of mom as the home base. So they would go explore, then kind of come back to mom, go explore, kind of come back to mom. They would show distress when she left, and then they would check in with her when she came back. The avoidant was somebody who didn't cry when mom left and didn't come check in with her when she came back. So obviously probably a disconnect in the attachment there. Ambivalent kids showed distress before she left, and was upset also when the mom walked out of the room, but then sort of kind of accepted the independence, and when the mom came back seemed indifferent. And then lastly, a disorganized, that means the baby was just inconsistent and exhibited contradictory behavior. And the father's role. So they found that the attachment from a baby to mother and father is very similar. The major difference is just how the guardians play with the kid. So men tend to engage with more physical play, whereas women tend to do more verbal activities with the kid. Childcare, around 2 years old, kids start to become more independent and prefer to play with friends rather than their parents. Childcare outside the home can be beneficial, particularly if it's a good quality program. Children who have spent significant time in childcare tend to be more considerate and sociable and have good interactions with their teachers. But it just depends on, like I said, the quality of the program, if they're getting educational opportunities or if they're just kind of put into a room with the TV on. Those are really different levels of engagement. There's 4 identified parenting styles. So authoritarians tend to be really rigid, demand disobedience, require a lot from their children. Permissive, pretty much the opposite of authoritarian, really relaxed. They don't have a lot of direction. They don't require very much from their kids. Authoritative is really what you're shooting for. This is somebody who's firm, uses reason, but encourages independence. And then uninvolved is just how it sounds. They show little interest and emotionally detached. So I think it's always interesting to reflect on, you know, can you identify your parents in one of these styles? And then think about, like, okay, if I decide to have kids in the future, where do I want to be, and how can I sort of change or adjust what parenting methods I received? Okay, so Erik Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. It has 8 stages. There's 4 in childhood. Those are the ones that we'll talk about today. And basically what happens is the child has to resolve a conflict, and he or she can't move on to the next stage or level if they are stuck in a crisis. He also believes that the crisis is never fully resolved, but it has to be sort of resolved enough that the children are at peace with the conflict. So, myself over here. So first one, so this is from birth to about 1.5 years. Trust versus mistrust is just like it sounds. You want to make sure their physical and psychological needs are met. If that's happening, then they're going to just trust adults in general. Autonomy versus shame. So this is, 1 to 3 years. You want them to develop autonomy and be independent. So if they feel like they aren't able to develop that, then they might have self-doubt, unhappiness, particularly if they're sort of overly protected or restricted from trying new things. Initiative versus guilt. You want to resolve it by parents reacting positively when children try to do something new. So, you know, a kid wants to help you bake brownies or something, and they're helping you sort of with, you know, one of the aspects of it, and maybe they spill something. How a parent reacts to that does matter, in that, you know what, they were trying something new, didn't quite make it, but they're learning a skill, versus somebody who's just going to get mad at the kid and say, you know what, why don't you just move out of the kitchen and not help anymore. And then industry versus inferiority. This is 6 to 12, and this is really just about how well they're able to interact socially with their friends and how they're doing in school. So the last couple of parts that I have are about Piaget, but I'm going to talk about that in class on Monday. So that's it for the first half. Thanks.